All right, guys, welcome to the show. I have a bananas one for you today. So, Israeli hostages are now speaking out, the ones who were freed, and they are berating Netanyahu. They totally disagree with his approach to the war. We'll talk about that. We also have Israeli intelligence apparently warned the IDF not to allow the now infamous concert that Hamas attacked, and they didn't listen. Again, every day we get wild updates about this war, which blow my mind. Then we'll get to, of course, famine and disease are on the brink of breaking out in Gaza because of the sanitary conditions brought about by the siege and the bombing. Later on in the show, Biden has a shocking admission, and Liz Cheney is now considering making a presidential run as a third-party candidate. And then we'll have some fun talking about RFK's disastrous appearance on Fox News and Trump's softball town hall with Hannity, which he somehow managed to mess up. How do you mess up with Hannity there, basically trying to hold your hand and walk you through it? So anyway, we'll get to all that and more. Everybody do me a big favor. Please subscribe to the channel. It helps out so much in the algorithm, and it doesn't cost you anything. We're trying to get to that 1,100,000 mark now, so I deeply, deeply appreciate it. And also, by the way, nearly all of my segments on Israel are getting demonetized because of how heavy the topic is. So if you support the show and you like what we do here, do me a big favor and help us out on Patreon. You can give $2 a month or whatever it may be. Any little bit helps. And remember, I've never had a conversation with an advertiser. I'm very proud of that fact. So you guys help build this show from the ground up, or you could use the thanks button on YouTube to tip. But anyway, I love you whether or not you do that. Let's go ahead and dive into it here. So New York Post here is reporting Israel is expanding the war to all of Gaza, and it enlists its largest infantry brigade for a growing ground offensive. Okay, so early on in the conflict, as we all know, they did a total siege, no food, no fuel, no water, to all of Gaza. But they told the civilians in North Gaza, hey, you guys got to go to South Gaza because we're about to mess everything up here in North Gaza. Now, since then, it's not like they were only bombing North Gaza. No, they were still bombing South Gaza. There were still a lot of targets in South Gaza that they were hitting. And of course, the civilian death toll is through the roof. But this is the first time we have verification, an official announcement from the Israeli government. Oh yeah, there's no safe place in Gaza. We're going to not only continue the bombing campaign in the north and the south, but also now ground offensive will continue into the south. Well, what happened? Again, I thought you guys said if you're a civilian and you need to stay safe, this is where you go, and we promise you'll be safe. It's been, 3 weeks since then, and they just do a total about-face, and they're like, actually, we were just kidding. There's nowhere safe. You're going to die. So really, really astonishing stuff. They say Israel has deployed its troops into the southern Gaza Strip, stating that the war will now cover the entire Palestinian enclave and include for the first time Israel's largest infantry brigade for the growing ground offensive. After destroying several of Hamas's headquarters stations across northern Gaza, that's according to them, let's be clear, Israeli troops and tanks were spotted Monday in the enclave's southern half, to which hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been evacuated. Humanitarian groups said they have run out of advice for the refugees fleeing the violence, which started when the Palestinian terror group launched a surprise attack on Israel on October 7th, killing more than 1,200 people. It says mainly civilians, but it's actually about 55% military targets. We have nothing to tell them, Thomas White, director of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, said of the refugees, noting that some of Israel's retaliatory strikes are occurring in Khan Yunis and Rafah, to which nearly 1 million people have run. So you can see here, this is some of the bombing. Got some other pictures. IDF here. More pictures. IDF. 2 kids in Khan Yunis trying to evacuate and get to safety, but there is no safety. This was part of what's now being colloquially referred to as the Trail of Tears from North Gaza to South Gaza. Okay. So let me give you this. Released Israeli hostages explode at Netanyahu. Quote, we were terribly afraid, not that Hamas, but Israel would kill us and then say, Hamas killed you. Wow. Hostages were under constant threat from the IDF shelling. One of the hostages said, an IDF helicopter shot at us. Several shouted at Netanyahu, quote, shame. One released abductee told Netanyahu, an IDF helicopter shot at us on the way to Gaza. You claim that there is intelligence, but the fact is we are being shelled. She said her husband is still in Gaza and she fears for his life. I hope a deal for his release is made soon. The released hostages accused Netanyahu of putting politics above the release of hostages. She said Netanyahu's focus on toppling Hamas's rule is about showing that, quote, you have bigger balls, and thus saving his own neck after the October 7th failures. Netanyahu tried to sweet talk and charm the released hostages, but some yelled at him, quote, shame. When Netanyahu claimed the ground invasion helped secure the hostage deal, a family member of a hostage responded, nonsense. Attendants weren't believing much of Netanyahu's words. A family member of released hostages said they were under constant threat from the IDF shelling and that they were transported on donkeys and carts without being recognized on the streets. Another attacked Netanyahu's war cabinet, quote, you're irresponsible and cold-hearted. Okay, so in other words, and we were saying this from early on, it certainly didn't look like the hostages were the number one priority of the Israeli government. Why do I say that? Because they did a total siege of Gaza and they started bombing all over the place. And if you care about the safety of the hostages first and foremost, you can't do an indiscriminate bombing campaign because how do you know you're not also killing the hostages? And by the way, there were early reports that at least about 20 hostages were killed in the IDF bombing of Gaza. So this is the hostages saying, no, we know we weren't your first priority. You didn't act like we were your first priority. And this is something that has been known for a while, that Netanyahu was experiencing tremendous political pressure from his right, where people in his coalition were telling him, look, priority number one now is quote unquote eradicate Hamas. Really, I would say it's collective punishment of all Palestinians, but they would frame it as, oh, eradicate Hamas, which by the way, I don't even think that's possible. I think you're creating more Hamas with what the Israeli government is doing right now. But they say that's the primary focus. Okay, well, if that's the focus, then the number one focus is not freeing the hostages, securing a deal. And so it looks like the hostages felt that the entire time and knew that the entire time. And they say we were more scared of the Israeli bombing than we were of Hamas. That is damning and that is devastating. And by the way, I hope that more Western media outlets run with this story, but I haven't seen much of it in Western media outlets here. You know, the person who's bringing this to light for me is the chief of communications for Euromed Monitor, which is a human rights group. But, you know, I haven't seen much of this in many Western outlets. Let's see if that changes. All right, so yet again, I got to give you an update here on the numbers. I think that these are still the numbers as of the last time we did the show. I don't know if they've been updated yet, but they say about 21,000 people killed, over 8,000 children. Of the 21,000 killed, 19,660 are civilians, 4,270 are women. Again, these are devastating numbers. I mean, these are the amount of carnage that's happened in such a short time frame is way above and beyond, for example, what the U.S. did in Iraq or Afghanistan. I mean, this is mind-boggling here. Injuries, about 37,000. There's been 76 journalists killed. 1.78 million people are displaced from their homes. There's been 60,000 completely destroyed housing units, 167,000 partially destroyed units. By the way, that's around 50% of Gaza is totally destroyed, wiped off the map, rubble. And then they continue here, like 262 damaged schools, some of them directly bombed, some of them, it was like a secondary effect and they weren't directly bombed, but there's still damage on the school. 1,102 factories or places of work have been bombed. 95 mosques damaged, 3 churches damaged. Actually, I think there's been another one since then. We'll talk about that in a little bit. 212 deaths among doctors, nurses, paramedics, people in the medical field. And then, of course, 22 hospitals bombed, 126 targeted health facilities. So, we go through this every single time we do one of these segments. I feel like it's important to bring it to you, but like, it almost doesn't pack as much of a punch as it should to just read the numbers, right? Because then it's abstract. It's like you have to actually see the devastation in order to really grasp how incredible this is. So then this one is mind-blowing. So this is in Haaretz. Quote, this massacre should have been prevented. Despite Israeli intelligence warnings about a Hamas attack, the army didn't evacuate the Nova Festival. Top defense officials held urgent consultations the night before October 7th about a possible Hamas attack, but no one in the IDF notified the Nova Festival organizers or the partygoers, hundreds of whom were mown down. And for 9 hours, no one came to save them. So we discussed a couple shows ago that apparently there was intelligence going back a year that was warning Netanyahu, that was warning the IDF, hey man, we think Hamas is training for a high-level terror attack. We have incredibly detailed evidence. We can tell you how they're practicing, where they're practicing, what the plan is. It's all laid out for us. This was a year in advance. But what happened? Netanyahu and the IDF shrugged it off and didn't listen to the Israeli intelligence officials. And by the way, we talked about this the other day, but it was like an all-female intelligence unit. I don't know if that played a role where they were like, I don't know what these broads are talking about. But that's neither here nor there. They brush it off. Okay, so we knew that. We covered that the other day. It was even more specific than the classic bin Laden determined to attack within the U.S. memo that Bush ignored. But now we learn, literally the day before, Israeli intelligence was telling the IDF, hey man, this concert is going to be targeted. This doesn't look good. Like, we should do something about this. And what did the IDF do? Bupkis. Nothing. Zip. Nada. And so then we got the horrific video and pictures coming out of civilians being gunned down all over there. And by the way, there's been like hundreds of burned cars from the festival, from the whatever kind of show they were watching there. And Hamas didn't have the weaponry to get 100 cars burnt to a crisp. So of course the speculation is, yeah, Hamas killed a lot of innocents at this concert or this party, but when the IDF finally showed up, how many did they kill of their own people? And there's been a lot of reports around that. I mean, there was a Israeli TV news report that talked about how there was orders from high up in the military to sort of indiscriminately shell in various kibbutzes where they knew civilians were, but they wanted to get Hamas. And it seems like a similar thing may have happened at this party, but they didn't show up for 9 hours. So the intelligence was, oh my God, maybe we shouldn't even have this concert. We should warn them or we should protect them or whatever. Nobody did anything. Then Hamas shows up and it takes them 9 hours for somebody to even come after Hamas gets there. So look, that begs the question, well, where the hell were they? Well, at the time there was reporting that a lot of these IDF officials were sent to protect some of the illegal Israeli settlers in the West Bank. So they were nowhere near the wall in Gaza. I mean, failure on top of failure within failure. The day before, they were like, something's going to go down at this concert, and nobody did anything. All right, more. This is incredible. So this was also in Haaretz. Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7th caught the Israeli army unprepared. But somebody seemingly knew in advance and made billions betting against Israeli shares traded locally and on Wall Street 5 days before the attack. So what the hell is going on here? Clearly they need an investigation. Clearly they need to figure out who exactly profited. But, the speculation is maybe those top level Hamas officials, some of them live in Qatar, some of them live in Turkey, that of course they were in on the planning. I never believed it. There was some reporting early on, they didn't even know about it. I never believed that for a second. I thought, of course, the top officials in Hamas know about the attack, and I'm sure they helped plan it. But maybe they were the ones who, through surrogates, were shorting Israel, basically betting against Israel. And then they made billions doing that. And then, of course, there's, it's possible it's not just Hamas, right? It's also possible that it was some of these Israeli intelligence officials through surrogates who were warning the IDF about an attack imminent, and then seeing that they weren't doing anything in response. So people need to get to the bottom of this to figure out who the hell made billions betting against Israel just before a terror attack in Israel. I mean, this is wild stuff, man. Again, the updates every day with this story blow my mind more and more. So we also have this. Today, the World Health Organization received notification from the Israeli Defense Forces that we should remove our supplies from our medical warehouse in southern Gaza within 24 hours, as ground operations will put it beyond use. We appeal to Israel to withdraw the order and take every possible measure to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure, including hospitals and humanitarian facilities. So Israel warned the World Health Organization, hey, dog, you got to get out of there. You and your supplies hit the road because we're coming. That's astonishing. Now, this is the Director General of the World Health Organization saying this. And he's like, what? This isn't even supposed to be in the realm of that which is possible within war. You can't just be like, hey, World Health Organization, Doctors Without Borders, UN, whatever. You're next. But Israel does do it, and they largely get away with it. So they say, absolutely insane. After the bombing of Doctors Without Borders, more on that in a little bit, the IDF will bomb the World Health Organization. And I'm not even mentioning all the hospitals. Hard to see this as anything else other than an attempt to destroy all the avenues Palestinians have for medical help. In other words, continued collective punishment. So this guy right here is the president of Refugees International, Jeremy Kondik, and he warns, quote, a classic famine scenario is facing Gaza right now, combined with vulnerability to waterborne disease and shattered medical infrastructure, could mean Gaza is on the brink of a significant spike in deaths not caused by direct warfare. Not caused by direct warfare. So in other words, with the medieval style siege, with no food, no fuel, no water, with the hospital system basically collapsing, with people living on top of each other in close quarters, in the midst of all this despair and carnage, it is very likely we're now going to see an outbreak of certain diseases, like they say also waterborne diseases. I mean, the water was cut off. People were literally drinking salt water to survive in some instances. So waterborne diseases, but also now famine, because there's not nearly enough humanitarian aid getting in. This is all unfolding right in front of our face, and it's totally preventable. Every aspect of this is preventable. I mean, I said it before, I'll say it again. This is like the worst scenario I've seen since the Nazis, what's happening right now. All right, this is wild. So you're about to see here a U.S. State Department weasel being asked a question, dodging, lying, and then it's going to be juxtaposed with the reality on the ground. Watch this. This is a crazy video.
You know, so where should people go?
People
what
should go.
Be the end?
So, let's take it one question at a time. Before you asked a question, let me answer it.
Sure.
People should go to the UN designated sites that are on Israeli lists as deconfliction zones that should not be the target of military campaigns.
There is nowhere safe. This place is not safe. Under that table is not safe. Children in that hospital is not safe. There are no bunkers here that would offer a modicum of safety. It doesn't exist.
So the U.S. State Department is saying, I don't know what the problem is. Just go to the designated UN safe zones. And this is the UN Secretary General saying there is nowhere safe. So the UN Secretary General said it, and then you also have reporters on the ground saying it. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. There is nowhere safe. We are telling you there is nowhere safe. Guys, we discussed a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago, Israel bombed a standalone UN building that had nothing else around it. Well, was that an oopsie? Was that collateral damage? No, you targeted a UN building on purpose. And this was at the same time that Israel was like berating the UN, saying you guys are like pro-Hamas. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So this is from Human Rights Watch. New satellite imagery reviewed by Human Rights Watch shows that orchards, greenhouses, and farmland in northern Gaza have been razed since the beginning of Israel's ground invasion, compounding concerns of dire food insecurity and loss of livelihood. Why would you destroy all this in northern Gaza? Why would you destroy it? Could it be because you literally don't want anybody, any Palestinians to return there? Look, we talked about it the second those videos started coming out of northern Gaza, of the IDF rolling through in their tanks, and every like 20 or 30 feet, you see a new Israeli flag planted. We were talking about, oh, I see what this is. You kicked everybody out from the north and made them go to the south, and at the very least, you're going to annex the north. You're going to redo settlements in the north. And, you know, potentially what they want to do is also annex the south. And, you know, there's all this talk now about, oh, voluntary relocation. Palestinians can go anywhere they want. The sea is open to you. Go ahead. All this talk about putting pressure on Egypt to open the Rafah border crossing so that they have a tent city in the Sinai desert. So in other words, expel Palestinians. Gaza Nakba, Nakba 2.0. So this is from the World Health Organization. Over the weekend, a World Health Organization team visited Nasser Medical Complex in southern Gaza. conditions at the hospital are worsening. With 1,000 patients and hundreds seeking shelter, the hospital is operating at 3 times beyond its capacity. The emergency ward is overflowing with patients. Patients are being treated on the floor. Tragically, many have taken their last breath on the floor. Painful screams fill the corridors. Health workers are exhausted. Medical supplies are running dangerously low. More people need care for severe wounds due to heavy bombardment. World Health Organization is deeply concerned about the intensified hostilities, which increase the risk for hospitals in southern Gaza. So remember, guys, in northern Gaza, when they told everybody to leave there, Israel made a point. We're going to make it impossible for you to be in northern Gaza. We're going to do effectively a trail of tears to get you to the south. But also we're going to target hospitals in northern Gaza. And they did. So the whole hospital system in the north has by and large collapsed. Okay, but then you say, well, they're going to go to the south. Israel said, hey, you'll be safe there. Then they kept bombing the south. But now the hospital system in the south is also collapsing. So if there's hospitals are collapsed, gone, imploded in the north, and they're on their way to that in the south, then what? There's no place to get help. And you have all these people with all of these wounds, all of these injuries, all of these problems, no safe harbor. And again, at some point, you have to look at the facts on the ground. You have to look at the empirical reality and say, hey, maybe that's the point. Maybe that's what Israel is trying to do. So here we have the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, and they have a message for the world after visiting.
I've just visited the European Gaza hospital, and the things I saw there is beyond anything that anyone should be in a position to describe. What shocked me the most were the children with atrocious injuries and at the same time having lost their parents with no one looking after them. We are facing a situation here that will not be healed by sending in more trucks. We need to provide protection to the civilians in Gaza, to the women and children, to the elderly people that I saw today that have nowhere to go. The majority of people I met today have been displaced several times. I met people who have lost limbs because they needed to evacuate between treatments, and they lost a hand or a foot because they couldn't be treated in the hospital where they arrived first. I was told today that the North has lost its entire surgical capacity. We have to find solutions to this. We can't turn away from what is evidently a moral failure in the face of the international community. I'm calling on all parties, on everyone who has an influence, to de-escalate and to find the military solutions to what is an immense suffering of the people on both sides. We have to protect the rights of the people. We have to protect the rights of the civilians. We have to protect the rights of the detainees. We have to protect the rights of the hostages. The ICRC will do its utmost to help alleviate and reduce the suffering, but we can't do this alone. And there's not only a humanitarian solution to this, there must be a political one.
So, I mean, I've never seen anything like this before, where Doctors Without Borders, Amnesty International, the Red Cross, the UN, the World Health Organization, all these various third-party independent groups are speaking up and saying, for the love of God, you have to stop this. And it's just falling on deaf ears time and time and time again. So here we have James Elder from UNICEF says that the so-called safe zones that Israel designated earlier, now they're death zones. And Israel knows this. Here, listen to it directly from him.
We now have the perfect storm for disease. We've been warning about this, UNICEF, the World Health Organization, for weeks. That perfect storm is beginning. And that is because this massive influx of people with absolutely nowhere to go. So the real risk now, the horrendous numbers of thousands and thousands of children killed, continually being killed, as you and I speak, risks being matched by deaths from disease. That's what we get when they're pushed to these zones that are anything other than safe.
IDF would counter that by saying there is a stretch of land close to the sea in the southwest of the Strip, which is about 14,000 kilometres, something like that, square kilometres, and that it is a safe place for Gazans to be. I've spoken to other people who say there is literally nothing there, there's no infrastructure, there is nothing that will allow people to live there safely. Do you know this area? What can you tell us about it?
I do. It's called Al-Mawasi. It's exactly 1K by 14, so 14 square kilometres. It makes up about 4% of Gaza, Gaza being one of the most densely populated places on the planet. So it's about 4% of Gaza, and it would require 80% of the population to be there. If you imagine a car park of people stacked on top of each other, still without a toilet, still without a drop of water. So here you would absolutely have zones that are zones of disease and would become, in any sane projection, zones of death. So it's such an important narrative to break, this idea that people can just go to a safe zone if they wish. There is absolutely nothing safe about this. And I think, Kay, to be honest, those people making these decisions and telling people to go there, they're aware of that. This is calculated. It's cold, and it speaks to the indiscriminate nature and the lack of any sense of decency that has been enacted on relentless attacks on mums and kids and families.
Quote, they're aware of that. They're aware it's a ludicrous claim to say, hey, go to this one area in the desert where there's nothing there at all and you'll be safe there. Well, you'll die from thirst or starvation. In that area, there's no shelter there. So they're aware of what they're doing. They're aware of what they're saying. They're aware that it makes no sense. They don't care. That's the point. The Israeli Air Force bombed the Holy Family School in Gaza City that belongs to the Catholic Church and hosts hundreds of internally displaced people. They thought they were safer in a church institution and got bombed on the first Sunday of Advent. Nowhere is safe in Gaza. So here we have Isaac Herzog, the president of Israel. He goes on MSNBC and he says the following. Everything I just told you, keep it in mind. Everything I shared with you about the updates and what the UN is saying and how dire the situation is. Contrast that with what this guy's about to say.
This war is a war that is not only between Israel and Hamas. It's a war that is intended, really, truly, to save Western civilization, to save the values of Western civilization. This war is...
I'm part of quote-unquote Western civilization. Don't sign me up for your barbarism. I don't agree with you. I think what you're doing is heinous and savage. Don't sign everybody up in the quote-unquote West for your savagery. Man, I hate this. This is like what happened in Congress the other day, and I think we'll talk a little bit about this later, but you had this resolution in Congress, and it passed, of course, basically saying anti-Zionism equals anti-Semitism. Well, hold on now. That's absurd. That's like saying criticizing the government of Israel, the official Jewish state, is the same as anti-Semitism. I mean, you couldn't create a more perfect brew to spread anti-Semitism. If you're saying, hey, all Jews are responsible for the right-wing warmongering state of Israel, which is massacring civilians, butchering civilians on a daily basis. This is the same kind of thing. It's, bro, we're not just fighting for us. We're fighting on behalf of everybody in the civilized, enlightened Western world. It's so, okay. When you commit atrocities, very rarely do people committing atrocities say, I am committing atrocities. I am the bad guy. No, you cloak it in high-minded, highfalutin-sounding values and principles, right? Oh, we're the enlightened ones. We're the civilized ones. And this is all, we're fighting for Western civilization against the forces of barbarism and evil. So in the name of all that is good, I can bomb women. I can bomb children. I can starve an entire population. I can attack schools and hospitals and marketplaces. I can tell the civilians, hey, go south and you'll be safe, then start bombing and invading the south. Every bad guy throughout history convinces themselves they're the good guy. And then they say things like this. God, it's unbelievable. There's so many anti-Zionist Jews. According to Congress now, they're all anti-Semitic. There are Hasidic, ultra-Orthodox, anti-Zionist Jews. They're as Jewish can get. And now, according to Congress, they're anti-Semitic. I can't with this stuff, man. Holy crap. UNICEF spokesperson, I feel like I'm almost failing in my ability to convey the endless killing of children here. Watch this.
I feel like I'm running out of ways to describe horrors hitting children here. I feel like I'm almost failing in my ability to convey the endless killing of children here. And so perhaps if the world could see those at risk, meet Khaled and Hannah. Please, meet them, see them, and pray that they are alive in a few days' time.
Israeli Channel 13 explains today the logic behind destroying everything, including the court and theater in North Gaza, by the way. I don't know if we included that in any of our previous segments, but they destroyed the court and the theater in North Gaza to make it uninhabitable, to prevent people from returning. There, some people are just openly saying it. As I said all along, usually internally, Israeli officials are being much more honest. But the face that they present to the U.S. and to the world more broadly, they have to cloak it and make these arguments that, oh, no, we are being targeted. This is a specific bombing campaign. But internally, sometimes they let it loose. They let it rip. So this is wild. I highly recommend you guys go watch this whole interview. Okay, this guy, Josh Paul, is the guy who resigned from the State Department over our endless arming of Israel. And so it's about a 15-minute interview here with Christian Amanpour. And he says a lot of things that are incredibly eye-opening. So first of all, he says here, look, I've heard from hundreds of colleagues at the State Department who supports what he did, how he stepped down, and he said, I can't be a part of this. This is a slaughter. We shouldn't be arming them. They're violating human rights. They're violating international law. So apparently and this is something that's good, there are hundreds of people internally at the State Department who are trying to steer the ship in a more reasonable direction. Okay, so that's definitely positive. But then also in the midst of this interview, and again, go watch the whole thing, he says that when the Charity Defense for Children International, that's a group, they told the State Department about the rape of a 13-year-old Palestinian boy by Israeli forces. The State Department looked into it, they investigated, and then they raised the incident with Israel, presumably to be like, hey, you should charge these people, or you should at the very least, demote them or get them out of a position where they have control over hostages, etc. And what happened? The very next day, the Israeli army shut the charity's office down. Rape of a 13-year-old boy. State Department looked into it. They found it credible. They tell Israel, hey, this guy's a problem here. What are you doing? The reaction of the IDF was not, they didn't punish at all the person who raped a 13-year-old boy. They shut down the charity that blew the whistle on it all. Now, again, keep this in mind. At the same time, you have a totally bogus, totally fraudulent, totally made-up fake outrage campaign going after Pramila Jayapal, because Pramila Jayapal said, oh, of course I condemn Hamas's sexual violence. It's atrocities. It's horrific. Nobody should support that. But she also went on to say, but we should be balanced in our criticism overall and also show concern for Palestinian civilians when they're being harmed, when they're being killed, etc. And there was this massive backlash. How dare you? You're an anti-Semite. There is no... And I think it was Dana Bash who literally said, there are no instances of Israeli soldiers raping Palestinians. Oh, really? Thank you for telling us how uninformed you are. Now, by the way, this is just one example. Go listen to the testimony of any of the political prisoners, Palestinian political prisoners who were released. The idea it's not happening on the Israeli side as well is absurd. Here you have a State Department official verifying it, and nobody's going to come out and correct the record. Nobody's going to say, hey, maybe Pramila Jayapal was exactly correct. Protesters now chant and challenge Biden over Gaza at every chance. From holiday events to memorial services, demonstrators now show up at almost all Biden appearances. God bless. God bless. Keep it going. The 5 most powerful pro-Israel groups in America, AIPAC, the ADL, AJC Global, and the Conference of Presidents, form what's called the 10-7 Project, targeting supposed misinformation on the Israel-Gaza war, among most significant lobbying efforts from U.S. Jewish establishment in memory. So they're going to crack down on quote-unquote misinformation. Now, here's the problem with this. Do you trust AIPAC to determine what is and isn't misinformation on Israel? No, it's quite the opposite. I think they are one of the number one purveyors of misinformation on the issue of Israel and Palestine. So they're going to play referee. They're going to lobby to have what? Twitter, YouTube, whatever social media outlets. They're going to lobby to have them take down posts that they consider quote-unquote misinformation. Well, a lot of the things they consider misinformation are just factually accurate. Like I said, we're right back in the post 9/11 moral panic hysteria mode. We're right back in it. Where anybody who doesn't toe the line, anybody who doesn't say exactly what groups like AIPAC want you to say, you're considered, a Hamas defender, a terrorist supporter, anti-Semite, etc. So I've been giving a lot of credit to the members of the squad who stood up very early on and said, you know what, it's time for a ceasefire. God bless them. Started out with like 13 of them. Now that list has grown to over 50 Congress people are calling for a ceasefire. Well, some of the earliest and loudest and most aggressive voices in favor of a ceasefire, AIPAC put a target on them and said, oh, no, we got to take this person down. 2 individuals were offered $20 million to challenge Rashida Tlaib. Her alone. AIPAC says we're going to spend $100 million to take down these quote-unquote anti-Israel politicians. Well, now, squad member Jamal Bowman, who was early in calling for a ceasefire, he draws a primary challenge from a staunch defender of Israel. They're going to target all of them, man. And if you think it's not effective, go look at what happened to Nina Turner in her race. She was up by a lot. She was up by double digits. And then there was a whole millions in AIPAC money came in, and she was defeated. So they're organized on that side. We got to be organized on our side. Because to get rid of some of the few voices that are actually taking a stand on the moral issue of our time, oh my God, it's unconscionable. So we have Representative Nadler. He's Jewish. And there was that vote that we just discussed. It officially declares anti-Zionism is the same as anti-Semitism. So you can't criticize the Jewish state without being anti-Semitic, according to Congress. Which, by the way, again, just to show you how absurd that is, I criticize Saudi Arabia all the time. They're an Islamic country. Does that mean I'm Islamophobic? Does that mean I'm bigoted against all Muslims because I criticize the government of Saudi Arabia? Of course not. That's absurd. Everybody knows that. Everybody acknowledges that. But it's different somehow for the Jewish state? No, of course you can criticize the Jewish state. Of course you can be anti-Zionism. By the way, what is anti-Zionism? You could support secular democracy and be anti-Zionism. We used to call that just being correct if you support secular democracy over theocracy or an ethno-state. Now, apparently, that's controversial when it comes to Israel in particular. So here's Representative Nadler, a Democrat. He's Jewish. He looks at the text of this resolution, which says, if you're anti-Zionist, you're anti-Semitic. And he says, hell no. This is total bullshit. Listen to what he says on the floor.
More problematically, the resolution suggests that all anti-Zionism, it states that all anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. That is either intellectually disingenuous or just factually wrong. And it unfairly implicates many of my Orthodox former constituents in Brooklyn, many of whose families rose from the ashes of the Holocaust. While most anti-Semitism is indeed anti-Semitic, the authors, if they were at all familiar with Jewish history and culture, should know about Jewish anti-Zionism that was and is expressly not anti-Semitic. This resolution ignores the fact that even today, certain Orthodox Hasidic Jewish communities, the Satmar in New York and others, as well as adherents of the pre-state Jewish labor movement, have held views that are at odds with the modern Zionist conception. According to the Jewish Encyclopedia, quote, the anti-Zionist worldview of the ultra-Orthodox groups, like the Satmar Hasidim, perceives Zionism and the establishment of the State of Israel as an anti-Messianic act. That is to say that these ultra-Orthodox Hasidic Jews believe that only the Messiah can bring about the true Israel. And I assure you, the Satmar Hasidic Jews are certainly not anti-Semitic. I should also note that there are those who try to smear even progressive pro-Israel supporters with the inappropriate label of Israel hater or anti-Zionist. Under this resolution, those who love Israel deeply but criticize some of its policy approaches could be considered anti-Zionist. That could make every democratic Jewish member of this body, because they all criticize the recent Israeli judicial reform package, de facto anti-Semites. Might that be the author's intention?
God bless Nadler. God bless Nadler. He's spitting facts there. There are anti-Zionist Jews. There are anti-Zionist Hasidic ultra-Orthodox Jews. The idea that that's anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism is insane. That's like saying if somebody tries to set up an official black nationalist state where it's an ethno-state, it's a state based on race. You have full rights if you're black, but anybody else would be considered a second-class citizen. That if you say, hey, I'm against the creation of that state, you're a racist and you hate all black people. That's not true at all. I'm just against ethno-states or states based on race or religion as a matter of principle. Because again, I believe in secular democracy. All right, we're almost done here. Starting this month, the German state of Saxony-Anhalt will require all applicants for German citizenship to submit a signed declaration of Israel's right to exist. Germany is just hilariously stupid at this point, man. On the issue of Israel, they have shut their brain off and they say, we support them no matter what because We know what happened with Hitler and the Holocaust, and, we sure did kill a lot of Jews. So now it's not like we're just going to endlessly support Jews. They think we're going to endlessly support the state of Israel no matter what they do. We genocided them, so they get one genocide on the house, and we'll support it. Embarrassing. Embarrassing. And then we'll end with this one here. Scholars who study the Middle East are afraid to speak out. Polling data indicates widespread self-censorship. This is in the Chronicle. 82% of all U.S.-based respondents, including almost all assistant professors, 98%, said that they self-censor when they speak professionally about the Israeli-Palestinian issue. Just over 81% of those self-censoring said they primarily held back their criticism of Israel, while 11% said they held back from criticizing Palestinians. Only 2% said criticizing U.S. policy was the biggest issue. So in other words, resolutions like just passed in Congress, if you're anti-Zionist, you're anti-Semitic. Basically, if you criticize the government of Israel, you hate all Jews. That has a chilling effect. And people are self-censoring. Like, I'm not going to be called an anti-Semite. I'm not going to be told I hate all Jews. So I'm going to hold back my criticism of the Israeli government. It's the biggest actual assault on the First Amendment and free speech we've seen, arguably, in our lifetimes. There you have it, guys. Not many good things to update here. I'm just giving you all the new things, and it's mostly disastrous. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.